I said a terrible thing. After saying all the great things about him, I said that I didn't think he was a top-flight play-by-play announcer. Well, I just said goodbye, and I had enjoyed the tour of duty.
He stood by Muhammad Ali. He challenged presidents. He made sports broadcasting smarter, louder, braver. But one sentence destroyed him. What did Howard Cosell say that made America turn on him instantly? Why did the man who championed civil rights get accused of racism? And why did athletes like Muhammad Ali and Jesse Jackson defend him when the world demanded he be canceled? Cosell wasn't just a sportscaster, he was a cultural force. This video reveals the untold story behind the scandal that ended his career, the loyalty that survived it, and the deeper truth that history nearly buried. The mouth that changed sports. Howard Cosell wasn't born to be a broadcaster. He wasn't charming. He wasn't smooth. He didn't look or sound like the voices America was used to hearing on television. And yet, he bulldozed his way into the spotlight, not by fitting in, but by standing out. From the very beginning, Cosell was a disruptor. Born Howard William Cohen in 1918 to Jewish immigrant parents, Cosell grew up in Brooklyn, New York. His father was an accountant, his mother a homemaker. Like many Jewish families in that era, education was their lifeline, and Cosell took that seriously. He read voraciously, debated fiercely, and sharpened his wit like a blade. Even as a kid, he wasn't one to stay silent. If there was a disagreement, he'd dive right into it, not with fists, but with words. By high school, he was already showing signs of the broadcaster he'd become. As sports editor of his school paper, Cosell refused to play it safe. He didn't write puff pieces or avoid controversy. He wrote opinionated takes that called out poor coaching and sloppy play. Some loved him, others hated him. But even then, everyone remembered him. After earning a law degree from NYU, Cosell started a promising legal career. He represented high-profile clients, including none other than Willie Mays. But even in his downtown Manhattan office, Cosell couldn't escape a deeper itch, the need to be heard by more than just juries. He would pace around, pretending to call sports games to no one in particular. Friends thought it was strange. Cosell thought it was preparation. His big break came in 1953, when ABC's Hal Neal offered him a slot on WABC Radio, hosting a kids' show where little leaguers interviewed Major League Baseball stars. Cosell wasn't paid a dime for nearly 3 years, but he didn't care. He knew this was his foot in the door, and it worked. When Hank Bauer made an off-the-cuff remark criticizing his manager on Cosell's show, the press exploded. Cosell realized that letting people speak freely, without PR filters or safe scripts, unlocked real moments. That, he decided, would be his signature. Cosell's notoriety burgeoned with the birth of Speaking of Sports, which became an outlet for him to voice his opinion, unhindered. He wanted to prove a point and was not interested in being liked or despised. He did not preach by soft scores and apathetic interviews like the rest of the sportscasters of that age. Rather, he asked the tough questions. He went out and confronted the athletes to call them out when they underperformed, especially when team managers made calls that were not in the best interest of his team. It was not a mere description of the game. He challenged the people inside it. He attenuated the voice of friction, who wouldn't mind if the viewers got uncomfortable along with him. And this boldness brought him to the moment that is going to change everything. In 1964, when Cassius Clay, a very young boxer, announced to the world that he would now be known as Muhammad Ali, most of America turned away from him. Newspapers refused to write his new name, and broadcasters ignored it. Many called him ungrateful, and others said he was just seeking publicity. But Howard Cosell stood firm. On national television, in front of millions, he looked into the camera and said, "Muhammad Ali." Cosell said it as if it were a fact, not an argument. For him, indeed it was. Cosell had a purpose. He was not merely calling a boxing match, but taking a stand for dignity, respect, and personhood. It didn't matter to him that millions would disagree. It didn't matter to him that letters filled with hate and threats began pouring into his station from all over. He knew what it was like to be an outsider, having spent his youth in Brooklyn as a Jew who had endured ridicule and scorn for his name and what he was. He was not about to allow anybody to take away another man's dignity. That one decision made them bond for life. But it was much more than a statement. Ali was banned from boxing for refusing to be inducted into the army and was rejected by the government and the media as a traitor. Yet Cosell continued to make room for him on the air, allowing Ali to speak, treating him not as a pariah, but as a man. And Cosell went on to say, "The price of integrity is high, but I pay it." He kept doing that for decades, speaking truth to power no matter the consequences. That made him into a hero for some and a threat to others. What no one knew then was that the same brutal honesty that elevated him would soon spark a storm big enough to end his career in a single night. Monday nights became war zones. When ABC launched Monday Night Football in 1970, it wasn't just rolling the dice on a new broadcast. It was betting the house on chaos. Television executives wanted something bigger than a football game. They wanted a spectacle. And Howard Cosell was the grenade they threw into the mix. The man who had made his name challenging athletes and calling out injustice was suddenly dropped into America's most sacred sports tradition. Football wasn't just a game, it was a cultural religion. The NFL, long known for controlling its image, was furious. They didn't want a loudmouth intellectual in the booth. They wanted polished play-by-play. But ABC Sports president Roone Arledge saw something the NFL didn't. He didn't want to be safe. He wanted fireworks. Cosell didn't just call plays, he narrated them like political theater. With his deep, deliberate cadence, he didn't say touchdown like everyone else. He said it like a trial verdict. But what really turned Monday nights into primetime battlefields wasn't just Cosell. It was the trio built around him. Alongside Cosell was Don Meredith, the former Dallas Cowboys quarterback with a Texas drawl, a playful grin, and a whiskey bottle always within arm's reach. Then came Frank Gifford, the golden boy, handsome, smooth, and unthreatening. Together, they were a strange cocktail. Cosell the firebrand, Meredith the jokester, and Gifford the peacekeeper. On any given night, Cosell might launch into a passionate monologue about a player's contract dispute, while Meredith slurred song lyrics or made fun of Cosell's hairpiece. Gifford would try to keep things professional, only to be drowned out by the bickering. But somehow, it worked. The friction was the entertainment. Viewers weren't just tuning in for touchdowns, they were tuning in for tension. Audiences picked sides. Team Meredith or Team Cosell. Bars and living rooms buzzed with debates about who was right, who was drunk, and who was unbearable. And ABC encouraged the drama. Arledge knew that conflict made for compelling television. Cosell and Meredith weren't just commentators, they were characters in a weekly soap opera. Sports was the setting, but ego was the storyline. The thing is, the fights gradually turned on air, as the off-air ones were really vicious. There was hatred between the two men. Cosell felt Meredith was too political, arrogant, and joyless. Meredith, however, thought that Cosell was lazy, unserious, and played the clown too frequently. Their arguments would start during breaks between commercials and continue in the live broadcast. Sometimes producers, in order to prevent them from fighting, would have to mute their mics or rearrange their seating. The number of viewers soared, perhaps as a result of the drama. On Monday Night Football, advertisers paid more for a single minute than for almost any other program. A phrase like, "he could go all the way," became associated with Cosell. His sometimes overwrought delivery made everyday plays into events of high drama. Whether you loved him or hated him, you couldn't look away. But not everyone enjoyed it. Sports writers hated the way that Cosell dominated the airwaves' most old-guard journalists, like Dick Young, openly mocked him, dubbing him Howie the Fraud. They simply hated the fact that Cosell drew into the profession all the glamour and showbiz they thought should be excluded from their turf. He was all ego and no humility to them, richly deserving, they feel, of every bit of scorn labeled at him. And, most importantly, Cosell did not care. He fired back through print, through air, anywhere he had a microphone. There were many who regarded him as unimportant. As a matter of fact, Cosell grew in fame and control. He wanted control over edits, content, and even over his co-hosts. Some producers said they felt they were working for him instead of with him. Others felt resentful that his controversies always got attention, whereas theirs never did. It bred discontent. At the same time, Cosell was still untouchable. On the back of phenomenon ratings, he somehow insulated himself against criticism. Seasons, however, began to alter things for Cosell. He was no longer just the pulverizer. He was being pulverized. The voice that carried America had overstayed its welcome. Younger fans did not care about his history. The new ones wanted fresh blood. Rivalries, both in the press and upstairs in the booth, were sharpening their knives. What Cosell said next wasn't just a mistake. It was the moment that shattered a legacy. The sentence heard round the nation. It was supposed to be another electrifying Monday night. On September 5, 1983, the Washington Redskins and Dallas Cowboys were locked in battle, and Howard Cosell was in the booth, narrating the action as only he could. But that night, the drama wouldn't come from the field. It would come from the press box, and it would echo across the country within hours. Midway through the game, Washington receiver Alvin Garrett caught a pass and weaved through defenders. Cosell, in his signature style, blurted out a phrase that would become one of the most controversial in TV history. "That little monkey gets loose, doesn't he?" 6 words. That's all it took to trigger a national uproar. Was it a racial slur? Was it innocent? In the moment, it felt like another quirky Cosellism, strange, theatrical, but not necessarily malicious. But by the time the game ended, ABC's phone lines were flooded. By morning, the backlash was in full force. Civil rights leaders responded swiftly. Reverend Joseph Lowry of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference publicly demanded an apology, not just from Cosell, but from ABC. He called the comment offensive and warned that silence from the network would only make matters worse. Other organizations joined in, labeling Cosell's remark as racist and calling for his removal. Talk shows, op-eds, and comedians piled on. Some framed it as the misstep of an arrogant man who had finally gone too far. Others used it to expose the lack of black voices in sports media. How could someone say that on national TV in 1983 and expect no fallout? It was ABC that scrambled. Initially, the network would generally say something vague like, "Cosell did not mean any harm." More likely, he would say Garrett's quickness, not race. Cosell said he did not say "little monkey," but that Garrett moves like one. But the broadcast tapes told a different story. His voice was clear. That denial made matters worse. Cosell, once admired as a beacon of honesty and moral clarity, now appeared evasive. How could the man who stood up for Muhammad Ali and struggled for civil rights now duck accountability? Cosell defended himself by pointing to earlier broadcasts. This is a phrase he had also used to describe white players, such as Mike Adamle in 1972 and Glenn Hubbard in 1982. It was a term of endearment, he said, a term he even used with his grandchildren. It wasn't about race, he argued. It was energy and movement. At that point, however, the context didn't matter. He had been thrown into the grisly jaws of the outrage machine. Cosell's defense was drowned by headlines and perception. The narrative had been constructed. A white man with power had crossed the line, and he had to pay. But support came from strange quarters. But not everyone stayed silent, and not everyone believed Cosell deserved to fall. As the nation turned its back, an unexpected group stepped forward, and what they said changed everything. When loyalty spoke louder than outrage. As the backlash erupted, Howard Cosell stood in the eye of a storm he never saw coming. The nation was furious. Civil rights groups demanded consequences. Networks scrambled. Headlines labeled him a racist. But just when it looked like Cosell would be buried by controversy, something unexpected happened. The very people he had stood up for began standing up for him. The first voice came from the center of it all, Alvin Garrett, the man Cosell had been describing when he uttered the now infamous phrase. Reporters swarmed Garrett after the game. Was he offended? Did he feel insulted by being called a little monkey? The press expected outrage, but Garrett shocked them. I liked Howard Cosell, Garrett said. I didn't feel it was a demeaning statement at all. He explained Cosell had always treated him with respect, both on and off camera. To him, the comment wasn't a slur. It was an awkward attempt at admiration. Cosell wasn't mocking. He was marveling at Garrett's speed and agility. But by then, perception had taken over the story. Still, Garrett's defense mattered. And he wasn't alone. Muhammad Ali, Cosell's longtime friend and broadcast partner, quickly came to his defense. He called the attacks on Cosell unfair and reminded the public of Cosell's history. Supporting black athletes, standing by Ali during his exile from boxing, and challenging the status quo when few others dared. Ali's support carried weight, not just because of who he was, but because of their long, genuine friendship. When Ali changed his name in 1964, Cosell was the first broadcaster to say it proudly. When Ali refused the Vietnam draft and lost his boxing license, Cosell defended him publicly and fiercely. Their bond had been tested, and it endured. Then Jesse Jackson stepped in. The civil rights leader stated to the world, more or less, that Cosell's record on racial justice was second to none in the annals of sports media. Cosell had been a friend to the struggle, Jackson said, urging the public to see it from all angles. One comment, said Jackson, could not negate decades of advocacy and activism. Jackson did not limit himself to just words, but appeared on television to defend Cosell. He spoke about Cosell's consistency, his courage, and his willingness to challenge institutions for the sake of fairness. You can't erase that because of one comment, Jackson insisted. Not when the man's life work speaks for itself. Others followed behind. Former athletes, civil rights lawyers, and even fellow broadcasters stepped onto the stage. They told the people that Cosell had faced death threats for defending Ali, had spoken out against the racism in the league before it became fashionable, and had fought the establishment for equality in sports broadcasting when almost none dared to do so. But the noise was just really too loud. and public indignation raged too high. It didn't matter that Cosell had uttered the same phrase for white players, such as in 1972 and Glenn Hubbard in 1982. It didn't matter that Garrett himself was not offended. The story had already been written. Cosell was the villain. Nevertheless, the devotion of his friends revealed a deeper truth. Howard Cosell had built relationships around trust and principle. In an industry where athletes constantly give each other the stink eye as regards the media, Cosell earned respect. And in perhaps the darkest hour, that respect turned into something more: fidelity. The irony was very painful. A man who is the mouthpiece for the voiceless now watches the machinery of the media contort his legacy. But the more the scandal erupted, the more people close to the real Howard Cosell would not stay quiet. And as Cosell watched his reputation unravel, one question remained: would ABC stand with their icon or turn their back when it mattered most? The fall of a legend. For decades, Howard Cosell did the unthinkable. He told the truth on television. He challenged athletes, confronted racism, and stood up to leagues, governments, and even his own network. But on September 5, 1983, 6 words changed everything. Said during a Monday Night Football broadcast about Washington receiver Alvin Garrett, those words were heard live by millions. Within hours, ABC's phone lines were jammed with angry callers. Headlines accused Cosell of racism. Talk radio exploded. TV panels debated his intent. But nuance didn't matter. Context didn't matter. The backlash had already begun. Cosell tried to explain. He said "little monkey" was a phrase he'd used affectionately for years, with white athletes, even with his own grandchildren. He cited a 1972 game in which he described white player Mike Adamle the same way. But it didn't help. America wasn't in the mood for explanations. It wanted someone to blame, and Cosell was at the center of the storm. For him, the accusations cut deep. He had risked his career defending Muhammad Ali. He'd called out racial injustice on national TV. He gave a voice to black athletes long before it was popular or safe. But now, all of that was overshadowed by one remark. A lifetime of advocacy was being rewritten in real time. Making things worse, ABC didn't stand behind him. The network issued vague, cautious statements. Behind closed doors, executives worried the controversy could damage Monday Night Football. Cosell had once been the show's backbone. Now, he was a liability. That was it. Cosell was done by the end of the season. Officially, he was not fired. There was no press conference or scandalous firing. Yet, the meaning was clear. His time was up. The man who helped shape modern sports broadcasting was being quietly shown the door. It was more than just a professional fall, it was personal. Cosell felt betrayed by the silence of those he had once supported. He expected criticism. He knew he was polarizing. But he never dreamed he would be abandoned so completely. One could feel the bitterness gnawing in his voice in subsequent interviews. He described it as a political assassination. He said the media were dying for blood. He claimed to know better than anyone how fast things could change the other way with the public. He was still on the radio for a couple more years, but the fire had long since gone out. The national spotlight had moved on. The voice that once shaped how America viewed sports and justice was fading. And this is Cosell's downfall's most cruel irony. The man who had spoken for others was silenced in a moment. Yes, that comment was offensive to some. Yes, perhaps he could have chosen his words better. But should one sentence obliterate everything he stood for? That question was never answered. By the time the dust settled, Cosell was off the air. The world continued to move on, not particularly better for it. An era in American broadcasting was closed. not with a bang, but a whimper. Howard Cosell helped define an era. With his downfall, the era came to an end. The dust settled, Cosell left the air, and with him, an era ended. Yet one question lingered. Was his legacy too complex for a headline to hold? Legacy versus controversy. Howard Cosell's name once stood for defiance, truth, and fierce integrity in sports journalism. For decades, he was the loudest and often loneliest voice, willing to say what others wouldn't. But after the 1983 "little monkey" remark, a lifetime of courage was nearly eclipsed by a single sentence. The nation didn't know what to do with him. Was he a hero who slipped up, or a fraud finally exposed? It's a question history still wrestles with. The fallout wasn't just about the phrase, it was about the clash between who Cosell had always been and how that moment made him look. This was the man who refused to call Muhammad Ali Cassius Clay when others still mocked the name. The same man who denounced the Vietnam War, defended Ali's right to object, and challenged the NFL's control over its image. Cosell wasn't flawless. He could be combative, vain, and unapologetically blunt. But he had a spine of steel. He spoke out when it was risky, not convenient. And yet, when the backlash hit in 1983, few beyond his closest allies stepped forward to defend him. The timing made it worse. By the early 1980s, America's media landscape was shifting. Cable was rising. Outrage sold. Sound bites trumped context. Cosell's boldness, once a symbol of resistance, was recast as arrogance and insensitivity. There was less room for nuance, and Cosell had never been a man of half measures. Some critics said he should have known better, that even if his intent wasn't racist, words matter, especially on national TV. They weren't wrong, but many ignored the full picture. Cosell had spent his career championing black athletes, religious minorities, and the marginalized. And Cosell, true to form, didn't backpedal. He defended himself, citing past use of the same phrase for white athletes. He argued context mattered, but to many, that came off as deflection. As society has become more reactive, Cosell's refusal to grovel only served to enhance the narrative that he was out of touch. The question became whether one moment can undo a lifetime of standing up for what is right. Some said yes. After all, impact is more important than intent. But others, especially those who knew him, saw it differently. They believed the outrage lacked a proper perspective. The fact is, in many ways, Cosell became an early victim of cancel culture before there was even such a term. He was judged not by the man he had been, but for one moment cut from context. Still, after his death in 1995, it would continue to flourish. Some recall just that incident which ended his TV life. Others, particularly athletes and journalists from the civil rights era, remember a man who put mouths to work as often as silence felt safer. Honorary titles, Television Hall of Fame, Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame, International Boxing Hall of Fame, are simply the formal way of acknowledging his legacy. But there remains the asterisk. The controversy still taints achievement. His obituary was beyond just an honor. It became a tug-of-war between respectability and regret. Perhaps this is the greatest legacy of them all. Howard Cosell was loud, blunt, and unapologetic. He didn't care if you loved him. He demanded to be heard. Even in failing, he made us face issues still present today: race, accountability, and the cost of speaking your own truth. But as his broadcasting career ended in silence, one final question lingered. Would America ever truly understand who Howard Cosell was beneath the voice that roared? What the world forgot about Howard Cosell. When Howard Cosell died in 1995, the headlines were divided. Some praised him as the greatest sports broadcaster of all time. Others brought up that one night in 1983, the sentence that ended his career. But in the noise, the world forgot the man behind the controversy. Beneath the booming voice and public feuds was a far more complex, vulnerable, and deeply human Howard Cosell. To millions, he was the sharp-tongued voice of Monday Night Football. To others, he was the rare intellectual who challenged racism, war, and tradition on national TV. But to those closest to him, his wife, daughters, and neighbors, Cosell was nothing like the figure seen on screen. He was gentle, quiet, even tender. At home, there were no rants or bravado. Instead, there were poetry readings. He recited Keats and Shelley to his daughters. He took long walks, whispering favorite lines under his breath. He played cards with neighbors. He wasn't a performer. He was just Howard. His wife, Emmy, Mary Edith Abrams, was his anchor. They married during World War II and stayed together for 46 years, until her death in 1990. "I wouldn't even cross the Triborough Bridge without Emmy," he once said. She was by his side for nearly every game, taping, and interview. Behind the boldest voice in sports media was a man deeply reliant on the woman he loved. When Emmy died, Cosell began to unravel. His health deteriorated rapidly. He underwent tumor surgery in 1991, was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and suffered multiple strokes. Friends who visited said the fire in him had dimmed. The man who once sparred with presidents and sports legends could barely speak. He stepped away from the radio in 1992. The world barely noticed. ESPN had completely taken over anyway. Sports broadcasting was getting noisier, more flamboyant, and less reflective. Howard Cosell, once the quintessential revolutionary voice in sports journalism, quickly faded from public consciousness. But of course, that was not all. Not just his silence, but the effacement of everything he stood for. Howard Cosell had always asked for the system. He stood for Muhammad Ali when the world turned against him. He spoke for black athletes when no one else did. He spoke out about the Vietnam War when it was not in to do so. He was turning sports commentary into journalism, then into social commentary. He didn't just call plays, he called out the injustice. And in 1983, he referred to Washington receiver Alvin Garrett as a little monkey. The networks went into a panic. Indeed, they called him a racist. The context, however, was overlooked by many. Cosell had used that particular expression for white players in the past. Garrett himself took no offense. However, perception won out in the end. An otherwise long and fabled career standing for equality in sports suddenly shriveled with a single remark. The networks stood by him. The league remained mute. Cosell, once the conscience of sports, was shunted aside. But he never played the victim. Not one to beg for sympathy. He walked away with his head held high, the strength of his convictions intact. He has never played the game. "I never played the game, but I know the rules," said Cosell. He didn't shoot any touchdowns and didn't hit any home runs, but he changed the game more than most who did. Critics might call him arrogant, his fans fearless, but everyone would agree that he is irreplaceable. Maybe it is that even today, his story ignites debate. Not because of what he has said, but because of what he had the audacity to be honest. Howard Cosell didn't just change sports broadcasting, he changed what it meant to have a voice in America. And long after his final sign-off, that voice still echoes if we choose to hear it. What do you think? Was Howard Cosell a victim of misunderstanding, or did he finally cross a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown powerful, give the video a like, hit subscribe, and check out our next episode on the screen right now.